Thanks for listening to Fluff and Crunch, where we talk about the connection and sometimes disconnect between system, setting, and story in tabletop RPGs. Hello, thank you for joining me. Still just me, because Chris and I are still having scheduling problems. I decided to drop an episode this week, even though I missed my normal Wednesday deadline, because I thought, well, I'm going to be gone for a couple of days, and getting out an episode next week will mean I will record on Wednesday and drop sometime later on Wednesday. And I've had an idea that I've been kicking around as a series for episodes, and I figured I would try it out for those of you who are listening and those of you who are watching on YouTube and leaving some comments. Always love those. So as always, make sure to like and subscribe, ring the bell so you get notified through YouTube automatically, and subscribe to the pod. That's where we still get most of our audience. And yeah, better to listen to me yammer about games than bad pop music while you're on your commute. So anyway, I've had this idea as I've been running this Traveler campaign here for the last several months to do some short spotlight episodes on different aspects of Traveler as a game, as a world, a setting, and also on different specific Traveler books and other products. And so my review of Opening Moves, the Fifth Frontier War opening campaign, was something along those lines. But I wanted to take a moment and talk, for those of you who are not that familiar with Traveler. You know, we always joke, haha, it's the game you can die during character generation. Well, you can't anymore, and as of Mongoose's second edition, which is fine. Other things happen to you that take the place of the death that you would have experienced in classic Traveler. But what I wanted to do is point out a couple of things, 3 things in particular in this episode about Traveler that I think make it worth your time to check the thing out. And as a matter of fact, there is actually a free Traveler starter pack from Mongoose Games that I will put a link to in the notes, so you can go check this thing out, like as I'm suggesting. So like I said, I want to talk about 3 things about Traveler that make it really cool and special. One would think that a game that was originally published in 1977 might, and it has, aside from one edition, stuck with the same core resolution mechanic for pretty much that entire time. You might be a little concerned and think, oh, gee, is it clunky? Is it really rooted in and representative of the heavy wargaming roots that were found in so many early RPGs? And I'll say no. I'll say that the core mechanic, and this is the first of these 3 things, the core mechanic at the table is very, very simple. It's simple, it's quick, and it's flexible. I mean, what a great combination of things for a core resolution mechanic. And it is a unified resolution mechanic. I mean, there are some tables, well, there are plenty of tables, for different situations that you might end up rolling on. But when it comes to resolving things, the players trying to resolve things through their characters, there is this single resolution mechanic. So it's not like early versions of D&D that actually had many different kinds of subsystems that had different mechanics for figuring things out. This is pretty straightforward. All it is, it's 2d6 plus modifiers or minus, and you're trying to meet or beat a number. So it's 2d6, and then if your relevant stat, say dexterity or strength or intellect, whatever attribute is relevant to that task, if it's high enough, you will have a bonus, +1, +2. Not that high. It's not going to be like +4, +5, outside of extremely unusual circumstances. +1 or +2 is pretty reasonable. You would take that and you would add that to the roll. And if you have a skill for that task, you would add your skill rating. And your skill rating might be like a 1, 2, or a 3. Traveler also has 0 level skills. And so if you have a 0 level skill, what that means is you roll a 2d6, you add an attribute bonus if you have it, and that's it. And with that number, whatever the result is, you're trying to meet or beat a number. Under normal circumstances, if you don't have a 0 level, you have no skill in something, and you roll, you subtract 3 from the result. So you're talking, okay, you got to meet or beat a number. Well, the default is 8 or above. So you think about this, roll 2d6, maybe you have a higher than average, you're trying to shoot someone. You have a higher than average dexterity. So that, let's say that's a +1. And let's say you have a 2, which is like you're solid. You're really solid with a rank 2 in a skill. Let's say you have a 2 in gun combat. So that means 2d6 + 3, you're trying to meet or beat 8. Those difficulty numbers can be adjusted up or down depending on the circumstances. And there's guidance in all the books. I mean, all versions of the rules. There's guidance as to where do you peg that number. But 8 is the default. So you adjust it up or down depending on things that are more difficult or less difficult. That's it. So core mechanic at the table is very simple and very, very quick. Also, something that I realized recently, and now that have been running this for the last few months, is that there are some skill-based games where you have an attribute and a skill, and somehow those two ratings combine together and they factor into the resolution mechanic. And sometimes those attributes and skills are pegged to one another. Like D&D from 3rd edition onward, attributes and skills are by default pegged to one another. So there are certain strength-based skills and certain charisma-based skills. There are a lot of games also, I'm sure you play some of them, where the skills and the attributes are interoperable. So depending on the circumstances, you might use a skill, you might use martial arts with, dexterity, trying to like throw someone or something like that, maybe strength. Or you might use it with like an intelligence type stat to try to, figure out the style that's being used by somebody else. So Traveller offers that. So you can use the stat bonus, the attribute bonus that is, with different skills, depending on the circumstances. So for example, if you're not familiar, Traveller's got 6 stats, and the 2 mental stats are intellect and education. And education is supposed to represent formal training and experience with, just like general education, formal training. Like how much formal training in things writ large do you have? Intellect is more your ability to figure things out, maybe work intuitively. And so, for example, if you are using, say, a computer to do something, I, as GM, I might say, well, in this circumstance, like what you're doing is pretty routine in terms of what the task is asking of you, regardless how complicated it is. So I'm going to say you're going to use education and that computer skill. Whereas if you're trying to do something novel or make a leap of intuition or something like that, I'll say, you're going to use your intellect instead. So there's that flexibility. But again, the core mechanic, 2d6 plus a couple of numbers from couple of different sources makes for a very simple and very fast resolution mechanic at the table. There are no tables, at the table. There are no tables to look up in books or things like that. You're not having to adjust stats very much. You're not having to swap out dice. Some systems have like step dice and you're rolling different dice. No, very simple. And because you're only rolling 2 dice, it's not like dice pool games where you're having to look at a bunch of dice and figure out like, how many this or aboves did I roll? Or worse, add them all together. It's quick. So 1, quick, easy core resolution mechanic. The second thing that Traveller offers that I think is really great is that it has a massive setting. And that can actually seem a little overwhelming initially, but I'll ask you to work with me for a moment. Traveller takes place in this future that's thousands of years in the future, and the default setting is set within the Third Imperium. And the Third Imperium consists of like 11,000 some odd worlds. And there is world information for most of them online and spread throughout all kinds of supplements. I mean, the amount of, if you think like Forgotten Realms under like 3rd edition got big and bloated and maybe overly detailed, you might just look at Traveller and say, oh my gosh, this is insane. But the wonderful thing about it is that the setting is so big that you can play like any kind of science fiction story you want. And so the weird thing with Traveller is, like as a GM, is you conceptually or figuratively, you look at the universe, the world, and it's enormous. But you have to ask yourself, what kind of stories do I want to be a part of creating? What kind of campaign do I want to run? And then it's a question of finding the places place within that universe, and then picking up the things from the books which there are plenty of, that would help you tell that kind of story. Like, for example, if you want to run like a high intrigue, espionage, cutting edge technology type of story, there are places within the Third Imperium where that would fit perfectly. If you wanted to play like an exploration based campaign that's out in the boonies, like at the edge of explored space, there's that as well. If you wanted to play, this is really cool. If you wanted to play a campaign that was, say, lower, like more advanced than we are today, but like barely getting out into like faster than light travel, you could do that too. Traveller has this lovely system of what are called tech levels, which rank civilizations from like the Stone Age through like almost looks like magic. The technology is so advanced. And the default setting, the Third Imperium, has a range where it exists. And if you think about this for a second, I think this totally makes sense. Anywhere you go, for example, in America, anywhere you go, there are going to be, if you go to a big city, the availability of technology, and we would hope the infrastructure and other kinds of things that are available in that city are going to maybe be higher tech than something at some small town in the middle of nowhere. The Imperium assumes that as well. And so there are areas where the tech level is higher. That is, what that planet, that system, that area of space and the planets in it, what they're able to produce themselves is higher up the tech level scale than something at some out of the way world. You might find some agricultural world where they are more advanced than we are now, but they don't have the ability themselves. They can use all kinds of advanced machines, but they themselves cannot produce them. And so they are selling their agricultural goods in trade, to generate the revenue to buy the different kinds of machinery to do the agricultural work that they themselves can't build. That actually makes a lot of sense. And so, one of the things, like I'm a big Star Trek fan, but I think a lot of ways, like in the Federation, it seems like everything's the same. Everybody has holodecks. Everybody has replicators. Everybody has transporters. Like there's a default that is just the same everywhere. And whether the people are living like this pastoral life in their nice little village at one with nature, or they're living in some floating high rise or something, it doesn't matter. All the technology in the background is all the same. Traveller doesn't assume that, and Traveller makes it really easy to incorporate those kinds of differences. So my point is, the universe that is published, that is available to you through official supplements and tons of stuff that people have just written and put online is massive. And so finding the kind of science fiction story at a certain tech level and of a certain type, exploration, military, trade, espionage, intrigue, war, peace, whatever, all of that can fit within the Traveller universe and make sense within the Traveller universe. Now, the last thing about Traveller that I think is absolutely brilliant, it's terrific, is in my experience, Traveller is the first system that created what we would now call like a life path system. That is, character creation has you work through, you start off with this character, by default is 18, and then you make a series of choices and roles based on, in response to those choices, where you move your character through a series of 4-year terms of service. And this is not to assume that everything is so standardized, like every work block in your life is 4 years long. It's supposed to be figurative, narrative, representative. But say you have you decide your character is from like some backwater of a planet and you wanted to be a space marine. Okay, great. You roll, you get into the space marines, you pick up a certain package of skills and other things that are related to that. In 4 years, you make some rolls. You see what experiences you have during that 4-year term. You see if you get promoted, maybe you got special duty, things like that. And this is all through the book. You're rolling through all these tables. Everything is right there for you. And at the end of that 4-year term, you roll to see if you survived. If you survived, then you can also see if you stay. You say, oh, I want to stay a Space Marine. So you stay for a second term, and then you go through that process again. If you didn't survive, back in the old days, your character died. Now your character doesn't die, you just suffer a mishap, you have a problem, like you got injured or you were involved in a scandal or something forced you out of the service, the Marines. Then you can decide to do something else. You run through as many of these 4-year terms of service as you want, and as your roles allow you to stay in. And then you decide at a point, I'm going to muster out, that just being the general term for I'm done with character creation, and I'm going to stick a fork in this character, and I'm going to start playing. Based on your terms of service, you will then have a variety of skills that make sense based on your terms of service. Were you in the Army, in the Marines, in the Navy? Were you an agent? Were you a scout? Were you a merchant? Were you a whatever? I have one player right now, her character spent a term in jail, which after being a corporate espionage agent totally made sense. It's perfect. But when you're done and you muster out, based on the number of terms you did and the different services, like the career areas in which you did those terms, you make a series of roles to give you mustering out benefits. And some of these benefits are financial, like you end up with a certain amount of money from each term, or from the terms you roll that for. And some of it is physical, like you come away with a weapon or a piece of technology or a piece of cyberware or an ownership share in a starship or something like that. And there are all these career area relevant things that when you step back from it, you're like, well, if the guy spent 12 years in the Marines and then decided to go be a merchant or work in the merchant service, and you could easily explain that away by saying, well, you served as like security. You came out as this experienced Marine officer and you were hired by a merchant company to be like the security overseer to standardize stuff on a ship or maybe a small fleet of merchant ships. Okay. The wonderful thing about this character creation process is that it completely torpedoes the desire of players to write a tortured, long, cumbersome backstory because it creates it right there for you. And it's not tortured or cumbersome. What it does is it gives you all these things, these incidents and these moments, contacts, allies, stuff that you roll that makes sense for each of those terms of service. You build your backstory in a way that makes sense so that by the time you are done, you can fill in the gaps narratively. And then you have this fully fleshed out, experienced character that's ready to play. And the lovely thing about this is that you end up having potentially at a table of players, you could have characters of different ages who have different amounts of life experience, and then commensurate with that, different types of skills, different levels of skills, different amount of money. That makes sense. You end up having this heterogeneous party, in terms of career experience. And I think it really enriches the game because it feels more relatable and your character feels a little more real and relatable. And so the characters can relate with one another, relate to one another based on that. Incidentally, in the current books, the last two versions of Mongoose Traveler 2nd Edition, which I've read both of, and I have the newest version, it does recommend a session 0 of group character creation. And I think this is really important. You sit down, everybody makes their character together so that everyone's hearing about everyone else's experiences. Like what I did is we went through this as a group and we did each person did their first term. And everyone heard, like, these are the skills, these are the experiences, these are the things that. And so as stuff came up, like contacts and allies, there was great, like, creative crosstalk at the table, like, oh, I could be your contact, or I could be your ally, or something like that. When the one character, I think she did two terms as she did a couple terms as a corporate espionage agent and then went to prison. And so that started all this chatter about, like, what does that mean? Where did you go to prison? And I had an idea about where the campaign was going to start. And so that helped me make some neat decisions to fill in some of those blanks in a way that enabled me, thus far, has enabled me to use that in the game. And that's cool. So you got three things, okay? 3 things about Traveler that really make it worth looking into, and a free starter pack that would enable you to do so, spending nothing more than some of your time. 1, simple core resolution mechanic. So quick action at the table. There isn't a whole lot of adding or sorting through dice. Everyone just needs 2 dice. That's it. Really big, varied, rich, coherent universe that like breathes in a way that actually feels more realistic and plausible than a lot of other, regardless of genre, like established settings that I've read. So there's that. And then this third piece, this really great, stood the test of time character creation system that creates characters that feel like real people. And if you do it the way they suggest with that session 0, you end up having a varied party of characters that the players understand one another's characters so that they can work together well as a team. And one last thing about character creation. The last step in character creation, the group chooses a skill package. And what a skill package is, it's supposed to represent like the general theme or vibe of your campaign. And what it does is it provides each character at the table some additional skill ranks to fill in any possible gaps. Like, for example, one of the skill packages is like espionage. Okay, so if you want to run an espionage style campaign, everybody at the table is going to get to choose from this list of skills to fill in some blanks that they might have. The great thing about this is that it enables the players to create some overlap between their characters, just in case, as you move through your skill packages, as you move through your career terms, let's say you didn't ever pick up stealth. Well, if you're going to run an espionage campaign, you're looking at each other like, well, yeah, stealth would probably be pretty useful. Well, that's in that. Okay, well, can I take that? Because everyone else got stealth. I didn't. There's like starship based, and there's, military, and there's exploration, and there's merchant, commerce, whatever. There are like 8 or 9 of them. And it's a really clever way to, as I said, fill in some of the gaps within and therefore between the characters to tie the party together so that they as a group are well positioned to function within the campaign kind of theme that you've established. So 3 things, Traveler, well worth your time to take a look at. And the link to that free resource from Mongoose Publishing, hey, I appreciate them doing that, is in the notes. Thanks so much. Thanks for listening. Have a great day. Thank you, as always, for listening to Fluff and Crunch. You can join our Discord. You can subscribe to the podcast. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel, all through the links in the show notes. Thanks again. Have a great day. We look forward to talking with you.